Recently, I got an email from a Master New Testament Greek member who asked me if a particular resource was worth owning. In fact, it was this book, Murray Harris's Prepositions and Theology in the Greek New Testament. This is a great book, but he'd been put off this book by reviews on Amazon. And that got me thinking, how would you know what books are good books to purchase and which ones are not worth purchasing? Well, in this video, that's exactly what we're going to look at. I'm going to give you 4 tips for looking for and selecting good resources. So let's get into it. So when I was preparing to create this video, I went back and I looked at some of the reviews that the reviewer, that he mentioned one review when he was talking about this book. And I went back and I looked for that review, found it, and then I looked at other reviews that that individual had written. And he made very generic statements, particularly things like with this book, he was saying that, you know, the title of the book should tell you that this man is about to assert his own theology over the grammar. And that's just not true. That's not what this book does, and it's not very fair to Murray Harris, who is a world-class scholar. He made a similar comment about Stephen Runge's excellent discourse grammar of the Greek New Testament as well. But then he mentioned that he really would have liked to have seen a native Greek scholar actually talking about the language in the way Runge does, which is really just indicates that he doesn't understand what a linguist does as well. Then I saw another comment he'd left on a commentary on Ezekiel that had been written by Daniel Block, who was a great Old Testament scholar. And he said that Block had a very poor, comprehensive and consistent interpretation, really not taking the context into account. And it's really just, these kind of comments, they kind of get to me a little bit because they actually say a lot more about the person doing the review than they do about the books themselves. But then people come along and read these reviews and think, oh, there's something wrong with this book. And there's actually nothing wrong with any of these resources that this person is critiquing. And there's a number of things that may have gone wrong for this reviewer in the process, which led him to even give some of these reviews. And so I wanted to explore 4 things really that I think are really helpful to, when you come to look for a resource, to know whether it's going to be a good resource or not. So how do you know what a good resource is, and how can you select resources that are going to be really helpful on your journey? Well, before I give you the answer, if you like this video and find it helpful, hit the like button below. And then if you haven't already done so, I would love to have you subscribe to this channel and support the channel and get more updates from this. And to get those updates, don't forget to hit the notify bell as well. The first thing you'll need to do before you even come near a bookshop is to actually make sure you know what you believe. Let me tell you a story to illustrate the importance of this. When I was, before I went to seminary, before I learned, we had an individual in our church who had a different theological perspective to that of the elders. Now, the problem here was not necessarily his theological perspective, but the fact that the elders, they didn't even have enough knowledge really in this situation to be able to interact with the different belief system or the different positions that this particular individual had. This individual had been theologically trained, he knew what he believed, he knew why he believed it, he could defend it, but the elders in the church couldn't. Now, if you're in a situation like that, where you're actually trying to think through beliefs and you're not entirely sure one view from another, then there's some groundwork that needs to be done there before you even go down that track. You need to know what you believe and why you believe it before you can engage with other people's beliefs. And this is really important. See, if all you do is come across a different view and you don't know why it's wrong, or you don't really understand it, or you got nothing to compare it to, then the natural thing you're going to do is just go along with that view. And that may be okay, right? It might be a good book, it might be a good author, and it may not be. And so you want to just find a good overall resource to start with and get your head around what it teaches. And so here's where what I would encourage you to do is to get a systematic theology. And there's a number of good ones, and I'll leave a bunch of links in the description below so you can get a bunch of those systematic theologies. You don't have to get a whole lot of them, but the ones I'll list below are ones that are generally very reliable, very good, and if you were to read these and internalize the knowledge in them, you're going to benefit from them dramatically. Once you do that, and what I would encourage you is, as you read through each section, say the section on bibliology, is to look at the areas where you would agree, and if there's something you're not sure of, there's normally Bible verses there. You can go look up those Bible verses to see what the scripture says about that thing. And then when you finish that chapter, then write a short 1 to 2 page review of what you read in that chapter and summarize your position. And as you do that with a systematic theology, which most of the time only have about 12 to somewhere between 12 and 20 chapters, depending on the systematic theology, some have less, some have more, but those are kind of what you normally find. But if you were to do that with a systematic theology, by the time you finish that book, you're going to have a pretty good theological foundation. And I would encourage you to do this. This is a great way just to sort of set a foundation for yourself so that when you do come to a book, you're actually not going to make statements like, well, this person's imposing their own personal theology onto the grammar. You can actually say, actually, this person believes such and such for these reasons, and that differs from how I believe things, or whatever it is. So at least that gives you a foundation, something to compare what you read to, which allows you, if you're going to do an Amazon review, it's going to allow you to do that pretty well. When you've done that too, you also want to make sure that you look at the importance of the areas where you do disagree, particularly with a systematic theology or something like that. And that's where I would go back to the last video I did, which I'll leave a link up here, which is finding the right hills to die on, which gives you a system really for thinking through what doctrines are important and which ones are not. Knowing this is also going to help you when you come to an author's works. So the first step then is to have a good foundation of your own. At least have enough knowledge to be able to understand your own position well enough to defend it. The second thing you need to do when you come to look at getting good resources is to get the right kind of resource. Now, to some extent, this is easy. Oh, I need a commentary. Okay, good. We'll talk about commentaries in a minute because it's not quite as simple as it might seem. There are other kinds of resources, though, that might be really helpful. For instance, a survey of the New Testament or a survey of the Old Testament. Let's say, for instance, you're studying Galatians chapter 3. Having a survey of, say, the New Testament would allow you to look at the section for Galatians to see what is the book of Galatians about, so that when you come to Galatians 3, you can see how this actually fits in the overall argument of the book. Now, you can do that by reading the book of Galatians through, but you'll find that these surveys actually provide you with a lot of really helpful background information, and they can string the argument to better often than what we can just from a simple reading, because they've done a little bit more study and they've done a bit of that work and behind the scenes to actually, and then crystallize that down into something that's a little bit more bite-sized. So New Testament and Old Testament surveys are great just to get an overview of individual books and even the arc of the text as well. For instance, if you were to get an Old Testament survey, such as the Word and the World, again, I'll leave links below, then you'll be able to look at, say, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, and it will tell you about those first 5 books and their composition, different arguments about their composition, and so on and so forth. So this is really just going to help you get an overview of the sections of the scriptures and particular books as well. There are also theological works, and obviously there are systematic theologies, but there's also things like a New Testament theology, a Pauline theology. There's, Union with Christ and Paul by Campbell, which is a theology of union with Christ as we find in Paul's writings. So there's all sorts of theological works. And again, if you're looking for a theological argument, and it sounds to me like our commentator, when he was looking at Ezekiel, was actually looking for something more like this, something that would trace the argument of Ezekiel, not just making comments on the text itself, but how Ezekiel's book and prophecy actually contributes to the overall story arc of redemptive history. That would be the sort of thing you'd look for in an Old Testament theology, and maybe even a lot of survey books would have something like that in it as well. The other sort of book is very common, we jump to these all the time, is commentaries. Now, commentaries are really good, but there are 3 different types of commentaries, and you need to know this going in so you can select the right kind for you. One of the challenges is that sometimes you can choose a book that is beyond your current expertise to really use well. And you want to try and avoid that if you can. Now, it's not to say it's always bad to do that. It can be helpful, but you just want to be aware that if you don't know the languages, there are going to be some resources that are going to be outside of your reach. And if you don't know other things, other books might be as well. So, for instance, there are 3 different types of commentaries. There are devotional commentaries, which are very much application focused. These aren't going to go into a lot of depth about the meaning of the text and how the grammar works. They're not going to talk about that really at all. But these are really just focused. These are the kinds of commentaries you can just pick up and read through in, like you would with a normal book. A good example of this is John MacArthur's book on Revelation. The time is near, I think it's called. I'll leave a link in the description below. So that's a good example of a devotional commentary on the book of Revelation, for example. Another sort of commentary you often find is expositional commentaries. And expositional commentaries are the kind of books that you are going to spend a bit more time working through the background. You're also going to look at how the text is structured a little bit, but you're going to do so pretty much in English. These tend to be shorter commentaries than the large, huge volume ones, but they tend to be the sort of books that, again, you're going to get into the conversation and into the detail in the text, but again, you're not going to see any Greek words or Hebrew words. It's going to be all in English. If you do have references to the original languages, they'll be transliterated. So these are very accessible, and anybody can pretty much use these. They tend to be the kind of commentaries that sound a little bit like a sermon. Okay, so those are expositional commentaries. And then there's exegetical commentaries, where you're going to get into text criticism and you're going to talk about, different variants within the text. You're going to see how the language is working. There's going to be arguments about how this genitive is working or what this infinitive is doing, and so on. Those are the exegetical commentaries, and these assume that you have some knowledge of the original languages. So if you're looking at an exegetical commentary, like for instance the New International Commentary on the Old Testament on Ezekiel, like our commentator was, you're really going to want to have some knowledge of Hebrew and exegetical arguments before you even pick up a book like that to make the most of it. So those are commentaries, and of course then there are grammatical works, and there are a variety of these. There are beginning Greek grammars and beginning Hebrew grammars. There are more intermediate grammars, and then of course there are more specialized grammars like Runge's, and even to some extent like Murray Harris's one as well. And if you don't have knowledge of the language, don't buy a specialized grammar. In fact, don't even buy a more intermediate or advanced grammar. Just get a beginning grammar and learn the language. In fact, if you want to learn the language, go to masterntgreek.com/roadmap and download my roadmap so you can start to see what it's going to take to actually do that. Back to the idea here though, if you're going to use something like some of these grammars, you're going to want to have some knowledge of the language, typically, to be able to use them at all. So I would encourage you to select the resource that's right for the kind of work you're trying to do. What is the question you're trying to answer? How much time do you have? And are you really looking in the right place? Don't choose a commentary if you're looking for a theological work. Don't choose a theological work if you're looking for something grammatical. Okay, so you want to look at the right resource, and you want to make sure you get a resource that you have the expertise to use well as well. So the first step is to get a basic foundation, know what you believe and why. The second step is to get the right kind of resource, identify the kind of resource you need. The third step then is to engage with the book itself. And here you want to ask questions like, who's the publisher? What kind of books does this publisher publish? Are they do they publish more conservative books, or do they publish a wide variety, or perhaps it's more liberal books? Whatever it is, you want to look at the publisher, look at some of the other books that they've published, and even what they haven't published as well. And so you'll start to see that while there's a lot of overlap between publishers, there's often things that one publisher will publish and another publisher will not publish. A lot of publishers specialize in one particular area. For instance, New Growth Press specializes in biblical counseling materials, and they don't really do anything around commentaries. There are other ones like Zondervan who do pretty much everything. And then there are others like, say, Hendrickson, who focus primarily in the academic world, along with others like Oxford Press and some of those sorts of ones as well. So different publishers have different focuses, and whoever's publishing this is going to give you a bit of an idea of, what sort of book it is you're getting. Now, it takes time to learn how the different, what publishers are publishing and so on, but that's one thing you can look at. The other thing you can do is you can look at the individual author. So where are they from? What do they teach, and where do they teach it? What else do you know about that place that they teach at? What does that tell you then about what doctrines or theological positions that person is likely to take? And do they already have a reputation that you're aware of? And if so, what is that reputation and where did it come from? Again, if you're building reputations inside your head from Amazon comments that may not be very helpful, it might be time to jettison some of those reputation concepts and to start to rebuild them. Having done that, now go to the reviews. And when you look at a review, you're going to be asking questions like, is this person giving us a solid review, a carefully thought out review, or is they making bombastic statements like, this person's imposing their personal theology on the grammar? So when you come to a review, don't worry about the ones that are generic, just pretty much ignore them. Look at the ones that are more specific. In fact, look for people, sometimes you'll find people in Amazon particularly that have listed credentials and things like that. You can look at other reviews those reviewers have done. You can look at the quality of them. Those are the kinds of reviews that you want to take notice of. Good reviews done by good people, and Amazon has a ranking system for good reviewers, so you can take advantage of that as well. For example, in the case of Harris's Prepositions and Theology, there's a couple of reviews there done by people with doctorates, which makes this, they give you a good solid understanding of the benefits and not of this grammar, where it's good and maybe some of the shortfalls in it. So I would encourage you, look at the quality of review more than the review and what it actually says, right? Is this a good quality review, well thought out, carefully articulated, or is this just somebody just sort of verbally vomiting onto the review page, right? Those are the kinds of things you're looking for. Finally, so you've built a foundation, you've looked at getting the right kind of resource, so if you've identified the resource you need, you've looked at and engaged with the book itself a little bit. The last step really is to go buy the book and start to engage with the author. And when you do this, you want to give the author a fair run, right? You want to look at what he says, look at the reasons behind his, what he says. Normally, you're going to find arguments and explanations. Investigate those. If they refer to biblical passages or other books, and you've got those books, look at those other books. Look at those Bible passages to correspond these things together to see, is this person really saying the right kind of thing? And once you've used that book and you've spent some time with that author, then, make a note to yourself just of what did you think of it? What was that author like? What did you agree with? What did you disagree with? What influenced you? What did it cause you to think more deeply about? And how has it changed you? And then be a good reviewer, go onto Amazon, review the book, and give it a good, thoughtful, and in-depth review. Knowing why you believe what you believe, having identified and used the right kind of book, work with the author to look at the author, the publisher, the book itself, purchase the book, used it, now pass on your experience to others as well. Don't forget those 4 steps, and I hope this helps you to buy some really good resources on, online, on Amazon, wherever it is, so you can study the scriptures more deeply. And if you are interested in going deeper in the text, consider reading the New Testament in its original language. That's what I teach at masterntgreek.com/roadmap, and you can go there and get your own roadmap to learn how to do that with me, and I'd love to be able to serve you there as well. I hope this has been helpful. Keep taking small steps toward mastery of the original languages, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. We'll see you then. They tend to be the kind of commentaries that sound a little bit like